It says 10 seconds.
It's a shirt. It's for free in the Seriously Wrong store with a small fee. With a small shirt buying fee.
Oh, yeah, the questions. That's what I was trying to look for.
Oh, yeah, I've got this open. Hey, folks. How's it going?
It's going good. They said. I heard them. Oh, there's some comments. You live. Hey, everyone.
Hope everyone's having a wonderful Sunday in February, the day after rent day. How's everyone's rent? Affordable this month, or got mic noise going on? Do you know what that would be?
Mic noise. Maybe.
I'm doing good. My rent was more than 30% of my income, but can't complain. Oh yeah, when it comes to delays, yeah, that's just we're sending data far over the internet.
Okay, yeah, high-pitched whining feedback. It's one of the plugs for our laptop. If it gets close to the cable of the mic, makes a sound.
Oh yeah, that was happening. We were recording the other day, and we noticed that happening also. All praise to Aaron for fixing that. And all praise to head commissar Aaron. So yeah, I don't know. How was your rent day, Aaron? Was your rent more than 30% of your income?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just barely. Like, it's almost at 30%, but I don't like the look of that chat box. Maybe this is the wrong time to do this, but those colors.
We're just looking at how to
like, look at that. You can barely see them.
We're gonna do a little bit of an aesthetic modification to the overlaying chat box, but while Aaron's also doing that, I think I just want to talk a little bit about today's stream. We're doing an AMA based on y'all been submitting questions, and they're like really good questions, and hopefully we can get to all of them or almost all of them. Some of them we might just give a quick answer to especially if there's a place where you can find more information elsewhere that we've already spoken on this, like an episode. I've been looking forward to it for days because I think like the questions are really awesome. And it's a testament to our wonderful, beautiful geniuses. And I also just wanted to make a note that these microphone setups that we have here are almost brand new. Like we've had them for maybe about 2 months now. And we've never had fancy microphones like this until recently. I actually used to hold my microphone in my hand when we were recording for a long time, when we only had one boom stand for them. So thanks to the generosity of patrons and
school stuff.
As a result, we now have nice microphones that have these hanging things. It's excellent.
I'm going to stop playing with this. I can't figure out how to change the names, but it's probably the wrong time to do it. We need like a black box behind it is what I should do. Then it won't be weird. We'll figure it out another time.
We're still learning how to stream. So, yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, just going to ask if everyone still has access to like the old questions or if they want to. I guess we can just treat it as pretty much closed now, but we also have the option of creating a poll if we want. During, I don't know, maybe we'll do that. I don't know. We don't know what we're doing. We make podcasts. We don't stream. We're very used to podcasting.
We're doing great. Just to reassure us.
That's true. And to reassure the audience. Just so you know, we're doing really well it's our second time. So So yeah, let's maybe just start with the top voted question that we received. So I'll read it. The question that we got was, when discussing possible futures, how do you convince people to be more imaginative without being condescending and combative by saying, be more imaginative?
I don't know. Like, if someone's really opposed to being imaginative, like if you end up in an argument where people are saying imagining like beautiful futures is useless and you shouldn't do it, it's going to probably be hard to convince them to be more imaginative. But it just, like, in general, I think I would say be imaginative in front of them and like show how exciting you find it. Like, if you do things that make you excited and happy in front of other people, and not in a way where you're like challenging them or imposing something on them, but just like, isn't this great? Unless they have something already where they're like, oh, I already don't like that for some reason, they'll probably pick up on your vibe and be a bit more into it. I mean, unless you're overdoing it, I guess, and they find it really annoying. Like, oh, he's so imaginative all the time. Just need a break from all this imaginativeness. Yeah, I don't know.
I think for someone who's like really aggressively anti-imagination too, I feel like there might be some usefulness in sometimes being a bit combative and condescending to them, because people who are like of the anti-imaginative position are usually like really trying to, I'll just like psychoanalyze this briefly. I think there's an element of like wanting to be cool and not wanting to not seem naive. And if you can reframe it in the right context using your social grace and skills to frame the lack of imagination as something that's, worthy of the same contempt that you'd give naivety, then maybe you could move them. I don't know. But for talking to someone who, like, assuming that we don't want to be condescending and combative, so I'm sure that a lot of situations would fit that too. I think Aaron's point about the sort of like something Mr. Rogers said is like doing things that you enjoy in front of children inspires them to either do what you want to do or find things that they enjoy. I think that same principle applies to adults, and not in like a patronizing way, just in that we all seeing people do the things they love inspires us, and also, I guess the context is important too, because like, what context do we need to convince people to be more imaginative? If we're doing political organizing and we need people to be more imaginative for the purposes of like a specific action or something like that, it's tricky territory for because I think it's really needed feedback. I think that like that's the thing is that people do generally need to be more imaginative than they are. The average, I think, political activist doesn't imagine to their highest potential, and we should always be encouraging that sort of like behavior from people, or like that sort of culture where imagination is encouraged, and is considered a positive thing. Yeah, maybe there's ways to be combative without being condescending, or to be condescending without being combative. That might work in certain situations too. I'm having trouble thinking of a good, like, bottom line, this will always work sort of thing. I think the closest thing we're going to find to that is Aaron's suggestion of just being imaginative in front of them.
Yeah, there's no this will always work for getting anybody to agree to anything or to do anything. That's just there's nothing that's going to always work for those things. I mean, like, maybe if you hold up a gun and say, like, imagine something, they'll try. But it might make it kind of hard for them to actually do it.
Yeah, that could scare them. And if they're scared, it's harder to be imaginative, so it might work against it. But it's worth a shot. Yeah, and I get how do you convince people to be... I feel like there's something else I want to say about this. I think... like, I'm imagining a conversation now where one person's like, oh, we can house and feed everyone, and the other person's like, no, that's impossible. And like, you can just, that's like an impasse. Like, that's such a, if you can't, if someone is very, very convinced that more things are impossible than actually are impossible. And I think that's sort of a common affliction. I think our best chance to convince them is to try to bring examples of really like radical changes happening or unexpected things happening, or like a metaphor I love to use is like before the advent of airplanes, like how did people feel about airplanes before we got these motherfuckers off the ground? Like how did people feel about the Haitian slave revolt before the Haitian slave revolt happened? Like it's very clearly true if you look through history and have a historical perspective that unimaginable things happen. And after the revolution, we'll sentence reactionaries to 10 years hard imagination. Yeah, that's better than most sentences.
You get out when you fill out your brainstorming booklet.
Yeah, brainstorming booklet. But yeah, like giving examples, and also if someone's a hard-nosed realist, if someone's a hard-nosed realist in the sense that they're thinking things that obviously we all know are possible are impossible, I think the way to convince them, the best way to convince them is try to appeal to their biases and using evidence, examples, historical things, citing the leadership of people that you know are generally accepted to be like ethical and historical geniuses now, like Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King. Like these are people that your average person will be like, oh yeah, Albert Einstein, what's he famous for? Being the smartest man in the world. Oh, and he thought this sort of stuff was possible. Like that's really helpful. Like if you can find third parties to be like, look, this guy's so smart and he agrees with me. It challenges the realist position when you point out that Martin Luther King wanted to have to abolish poverty and do like the Poor People's Campaign to like challenge capitalist inequity at the end of his life, because our popular idea of Martin Luther King is he was like this incredible ethical leader from history that achieved so many great things. So yeah, there's some stuff to think there, hopefully, for the person who asked this question. Hopefully that's helpful in whatever situation you're dealing with where you need to convince people to be imaginative.
So do you think that socialism would benefit from abandoning the aesthetics of past revolutions? If so, what aesthetic choices should we make differently? So when they say aesthetics, are we just talking like, using Soviet fonts and like big red, like
I think so.
Hammer sickle thing, like the
that's
imagery.
How I interpreted it. Yeah. But so I think we need to acknowledge that, like when we look at something like the Soviet history or like the Chinese Revolution, and like Maoism and stuff, is like this historical stuff has like a really, really negative reputation in certain circles. And actually I'd say probably the majority of circles, and for people who identify with this iconography or history, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I'm sure you've experienced it. Would socialism benefit from abandoning these aesthetics? I'm not actually sure if it's possible. So, like, I mean, if you look at the example of like the Bernie Sanders campaign, which is obviously like very distinct from a Leninist strategy for revolution, he's using the word socialism. He's added the word democratic to the beginning of it, and he's also really carefully used a different sort of aesthetic choices. Like he's not trying to invoke Soviet revolutionary imagery or the idea of like the Cultural Revolution in China. He's not trying to say, hey, let's turn America into Cuba. There might be a very, very small amount of people in America that wish he would say that. But he's chosen to not do that, and I think for really intelligent and pragmatic reasons based on the context that he was in. I think the history of...
Oh, you can't see it. I gotta get the screen sharing thing set up.
Yeah.
The Sanders 2020. Yeah, I think this would be a bad move for the campaign. Like, specifically the Bernie Sanders campaign, if we were talking about that. But in general, like I don't think we should rule it out. It's a subculture within the left that, like, I think there's value in having connection to that history, and there's also value in critiquing that history. Um, I don't particularly like it. I wouldn't want to make it the main look, or the like evoking that through your aesthetic, to me just brings a whole bunch of extra baggage along with it that you then have to also deal with. And like there's some people who are very highly motivated to deal with all that baggage and in their groups or whatever, and like more power to them, or in their personal advocating for socialism. But like in general, as a public relations strategy, it doesn't strike me as like the best thing generally.
Uh, uh, Something that comes to mind also is Jacobin magazine. So Jacobin magazine is named after one of the main factions of the French Revolutionary Terror, which is pretty edgy stuff. And then they've also used iconography, which is sort of like reminiscent of like Bolshevik Revolution and other similar revolutions intentionally, while advancing basically democratic socialist policies that are more along the lines of Bernie than Lenin. And that's been successful for them. Like that, and Lenin's been Jacobin has been successful for the left. I think like having Jacobin around has been part of the growth of the left that we've seen recently. So if I were to like lead a revolutionary cell or a political cell, I might opt to not use this sort of iconography. But yeah, like I said before, I don't think we can fully abandon it. It's part of the history and legacy of like humankind and organization on Earth in a meaningful way. It's not something that I'd want to like strictly identify with. And also I just want to mention, when we say past revolutions, like these sort of aesthetic, like these sort of Soviet aesthetics and post-Soviet aesthetics come to mind. But there's also sort of the aesthetic choices of, say, like the Democratic Federation in northern Syria, so an ongoing revolution, or like the Zapatistas. There's some aesthetic choices there, like like Zapatista's aesthetic choice of the balaclava with the pipe is fucking sick. And like I also don't think it has that level of connotation with the average member of the public. I think the average member of the public can actually see that as dope and badass. And I think there's probably stuff too, and like for if anyone here is like really into the aesthetics of these like, you know, Maoist history or like Soviet history and stuff, there are probably elements within there that can be reclaimed and incorporated in modern political stuff in a way that that doesn't have those same negative effects. And I mean, if people want to go for it, they can try. I'm suspicious that it's probably not going to be the guiding aesthetics of the future. Unless there has been a secret faction of USSR Soviets that have been secretly under the surface planning a secret comeback campaign all this time. And a bunch of things that we see out here in the exoteric world are actually reflective of an esoteric power struggle between a secret, truly good communist cell that was rooted in Soviet Russia, which has been battling capitalism for decades and decades and decades, and they're about to reveal themselves after Bernie Sanders becomes president. If that sort of thing happened, then I think the aesthetics might be back in a big way, but I'm not sure that that's going to happen or is happening. And what aesthetic choices should we make differently? I don't have any final aesthetic choices on like my preferred revolution, but I think if we look at the people who are paid to make aesthetics under capitalism, these are like highly professional aestheticians, graphic designers, etc., who think really deeply about making things appealing. And if you go to the Apple store or the Windows store, you can get an idea of like what aesthetics consumers seem to like or respond to, that they have some evidence to suggest. I'm not saying like our revolution should be an Apple store. I'm saying that we should consciously design aesthetics with our understandings of best aesthetic practices, and treat it like we treat any other sort of like public relations campaign. I don't know. I think that's...
Yeah, I don't have any particular advice for what to do.
And you might say
Whatever
that
people want.
you might be like, oh, if we use Soviet aesthetics in the 2016 election, no one will vote for us. But if you use Soviet aesthetics in the 2028 election, it's the only way that you can win Iowa. I don't know.
How do you introduce centrists to your views? Centrist can mean a lot of things, so like it's kind of hard to like. Do we mean someone who calls themselves a centrist but has kind of like contrarian right-wing views on almost everything, versus someone who's just kind of like apolitical, but like usually votes Democrat, like they're like a Hillary Clinton style centrist. Like there's a lot of different things there, but like generally I think introducing people who don't have your views to your views, the best, like some obvious advice is start with things that you think they might agree with. I'm assuming those are people that you kind of know and like and want to keep knowing and liking, and not like arguing online or something. You start with things that you think they would be the most amenable to, but also like big part of it is ask them about their views more so than just like telling them all about yours, and then find little bits of overlap that can relate between what you think and what they think, or even points of disagreement. And you could be like, oh, see, yeah, you think this thing, but like our perspective is a little different, because if I want to do, we want this outcome, so we might do it more this way. But I understand the concern, or like why you want to have it like that, and that's why I think our thing's better. Like relating it to what they already think will get them much more engaged than if you say, hey, this is really important to me. I want to tell you about a whole bunch of my political opinions, or even just one of them, like in great detail. That makes people feel a bit imposed upon, like, oh, someone's pitching this to me and now I have to respond to them with my opinion on their political opinions. And like you can't even form an answer when someone's introducing a new idea to you. You can't really form an answer in the moment unless it's something you've already thought about. So that's why I think starting with things they have already thought about is a good place, and then kind of branching off from there. And also just generally talking to people and feeling out what their opinions are is going to make the conversation much more of a conversation where they feel engaged, and if they feel like you're listening to them, they're going to be much more interested in listening to you when you either agree or disagree with individual points of what they're saying. So yeah, talk to them, like make it a conversation, and like be genuinely interested in what they think. And yeah, just be strategic. Like don't start right off with your most radical, most off-putting views. Like, hey, what's up? We got to abolish all prisons today. What do you think?
It's funny because
name's Aaron, by the way.
I was just thinking about prison abolition and the way that I've dealt with this sort of stuff with people who are more like, I guess like colleagues or like acquaintances, and like how I've broached the subject of prison abolition with them. It's the way that I've usually done it. I don't know if this works. I'm just thinking back on like how it's actually happened in practice, because I haven't exactly like been like, oh, everyone around me's turned into a prison abolitionist since I started this. I think it's just what has happened socially is like people will. We're talking about some issue and there's something comes up with like the justice system or something like that, and like while we're having a discussion, we're totally on the same page of like, oh, what, all these horrible things about the way the justice system is set up, or like the systemic racism and stuff. Like people are pretty hip to a lot of issues with the justice system now, and then at some point in the conversation just being like, well, you know, personally I think we should just get rid of prisons altogether, and then just go back to talking about the more accessible stuff. It's just like dropping those seeds, that the very reasonable conversation they're having with someone that they agree with quite a bit, is also someone who, and also when I identified as an anarchist, this was the same sort of thing of like, I felt like there was a real positive effect in like having a really grounded, down to earth conversation that you just drop something in the middle of it that that you suspect they would find sort of mind-boggling or strange, and then just return back to the regular context. Um, does this work to create a world with more prison abolitionists? I honestly don't know, but that's just what I've done when dealing with centrists personally.
Yeah. Yeah, prison abolition's a good example because of how difficult it is for people to get on board with it, because like we talked about in the episode a whole bunch, the immediate thought is, oh, you want murderers running around on the streets. So yeah, that's something you got to like ease people into, or just start with things like restorative justice, start with things like decarceration programs, ending drug war, like related issues. Like I just want as few people in prison as possible. I think is much more palatable to most people, and that's probably how I would usually frame it almost all the time, if I'm not like doing a leftist podcast. I should turn those sounds off. I would generally just not bring up abolishing prisons until like later, but like dropping it in casually the way you mentioned too also could be good for like just stretching that Overton window a bit. But
I feel like that's sort of what we do on the show too sometimes, where we'll like try to have the bulk of the conversation be something that we think is accessible, responding to like common criticisms of things and stuff like that. And then we'll just also drop in a few things that we take for granted the average person doesn't take for granted, and then hopefully by association our eminently reasonable and accessible conversation helps lift up those points where we say that we need to have a decentralized commune of communes following a libertarian, socialist, or anarchistic agenda towards providing all to all. And then we just get back to what we're saying. I think that's a good thing. So Bitmaskable said, I think it's useful to start with your motivation for wanting the change and not the specific ideas. And I think that is really good advice also, that especially when we're talking about needs, and a lot of socialism is about talking about unmet needs and how we meet them. And I think if you can bring someone in conversation to the point where they're really meditating and thinking about someone's needs, it can help to radicalize them. Like, for example, like people who are homeless and the desire, which is unfortunately radical, to end homelessness. The fact that everyone doesn't just automatically say, oh, obviously a primary political priority, that any politician that isn't contributing to this is unethical and monster. We don't have that that cultural context where it's all assumed. And the reason we don't have that cultural context where it's all assumed is because people like centrists or others, even leftists or whatever, like it's not a label thing. This is just they don't feel what it means to have homelessness. And if we can make them feel what it means to have homelessness, it's going to make the distance between that feeling and advocating for a transformation of society is short. There's like a reason why a lot of people who support Sanders' campaign, for example, have these horrible experiences with the U.S. medical system. That felt experience, that lived experience, but also the sympathy for just becoming aware of someone's experience like that. Like, oh, my coworker almost died. They didn't have this medical coverage and all this blah, 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 blah. Or they almost lost their daughter over this and they're massively in debt because they love their child and blah, blah, blah. That experience makes a short distance between centrism and radicalism, I think. So I agree with that comment.
I just saw an error pop up that said we might be like stuttering a bit or not streaming fast enough. If anyone noticed any issue, there wasn't any comments yet, so I assume it hasn't been terrible. And I just closed my torrent client, so hopefully that will fix whatever was causing it. But just wanted to mention, if it's an issue, let us know.
So the next question here, what do you see as the key steps to a more perfect library socialism, and what allies can we donate sweat and money to for furthering that cause? This is something that, I mean, we don't have a fully fledged transitionary map in terms of key steps. I think, I mean, a key step definitely is democratization. And democratization, not just of like existing democratic institutions, like for example, moving to proportional representation, ranked ballots, range voting, and like systems that are more reflective of people's actual wishes. That's going to be massively helpful for creating something that I think eventually we'll look back on and call library socialism.
I'm a good seeder, Bill. Don't worry.
I think democratization of like organizations are also important, where you have like an institution like the Democratic Party or the Liberal Party or New Democratic Party here in Canada. These organizations aren't democratic enough, and if we can take steps to democratize them, you're going to see more and more ideas come forward that are akin to sort of library socialism. Like we have jokingly say that, library socialism is a collection of all the good ideas. So if I think that if you have democratic institutions where people can have a say, where they can know that their voice is meaningfully heard and they can participate in group reason to come to conclusions together, then they're going to come to, in many cases, a lot of the same sort of conclusions that we have. I mean, starting with most obviously something like ending homelessness is something I think everyone can get behind. Some other stuff might take some more convincing.
Yeah, in terms of key steps, I think it would be really interesting to try and like imagine some specific pathways, like this happened, then this happened, then this happened, or like we achieved this, then this, then this. And that gets us to a library socialist society. But like it's always necessarily going to be an imaginative exercise more so than like an actual roadmap, because you can't actually make a roadmap for this kind of thing. But I think the imaginative exercise could be really useful. In the spirit of library socialism is just all the good ideas. One thing I wrote down for this question is like, what allies can you donate sweat and money to for furthering the cause? Well, like obviously libraries, but really like any organization that's doing good work, helping to meet people's needs or foster better relationships in society, like helping people. I think helping people in general is a good place to donate sweat and money to. But like more specifically related to libraries, I had the thought, and I'm not 100% sure about this, but I'm throwing it out because I think it's interesting, was the idea of like far leftist entryism into libraries. Like if a lot of people just moved into the library system, like doing some volunteer work maybe, or as librarians trying to get in there, and then working to radicalize the institutions in slight ways of like, hey, what else can we provide for people? Like, what else could we ask the city for money for? Like, libraries are already this thing in society where it's normal for cities to invest money into institutions that give away things for free to help people's needs. So it's like this pathway that already exists for helping to create common spaces and common resources that people can use. And like, when I think about expanding libraries, there's just so much you can do. Like in the documentary about the New York library thing, they had a scene where they were giving away these portable Wi-Fi things to people so that they could use the internet at home. That you rented them out for like 6 months at a time or something, like a long period of time, so people who didn't have the internet could have the internet. So like there's all kinds of things that libraries can do. It's so open-ended, and I think a lot of these institutions will just need people to spearhead stuff like that. So if you're interested in that, I think it could be a really good thing. And I think a career in a library are real careers. I don't know much about what it's actually like to work in a library or try to push for these. Like, I'm not saying this will be easier. I know how to do it. But it's a thought that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, on that front too, it makes me think about just how library spaces already exist and are accessible, and we can help radicalize libraries by being present in them more. And like I know libraries, I think it varies from institution to institution. But if you go to a library and they don't have a certain book, you can request it, and there's a good chance they'll order it and add it to their collection, especially if more than one person is requesting it. So we can influence like existing lending libraries, book libraries, by requesting things that we think will the add to the totality there. But there's also institutions like there's existing tool libraries in a lot of cities, and things that function on these sort of principles in addition to helping people. Like there's organizations that help people. There's stuff like Food Not Bombs, or like people who homeless shelters need volunteers and stuff like that. All this is obviously like awesome stuff to do. But then there's also stuff like tool libraries, and when a tool library starts up, I think it's important, if you believe in the principles of it, to participate in it, and contribute to it, and refer other people to it and hype it up, because if a tool library opens and closes without a successful like base of people using it, making sure that the rent is paid, I think that's sort of a tragic thing, because that is something that we could sort of prefigure, and move closer to this sort of ideal society where we've challenged typical relations of property. And then like broadly in terms of allies, I really like things like tenants unions. There's a tenants union in Vancouver I really like. I also really I like organizations like the IWW, or even stuff like, I think the DSA is pretty legit in that it, at the very least, if nothing else, it can help people be trained in outreach and talking to the public, and giving people an excuse to talk to the public a lot, which builds up skills which are useful and necessary for sort of the narrative work that needs to be done over our lifetimes. So and I think that's a key step too, is the narrative work, and I think it's something that it's like what we focus on the show a lot, is trying to do that narrative work, and giving people the tools to do that narrative work in their communities. And by that, I just mean spreading these ideas that we think are important, and having the tools to have discussions, even if they're maybe critical discussions coming from other people, and being able to like discuss these issues in detail to make the case that there's a reason to switch to this other way of organizing society.
Yeah, and just quickly on the thing you mentioned about just using libraries as being good for this. Also encouraging other people to use libraries. Like it just struck me that the more people who are making use of these institutions and all the various different things that they offer, the more that cities and municipalities are going to have to respond to that demand. Like if the library's always really, really busy, they might expand. They might build another library if there's only one in your city, or like make a bigger library or add other things to it. If they see that people are using these things, that increases the argument for increasing funding and increasing services that are available there. And also on the flip side, like working in municipal politics to increase library funding, increase funding for various programs that could be offered through the library. Like there's a political side to that too, because there has to be some organizing work done in order to get more energy and focus on funding and expanding those institutions.
So the next question here is, what do you think of co-ops as an example of or path to library socialism? I like co-ops. I like cooperatively run businesses. I think that's a good thing. I think that democratic workplaces, whatever workplaces exist in our utopian future, should be democratic, to whatever degree we have workplaces in that way. And I think it's a positive... like the comparison of like a corporation which is run an authoritarian, non-democratic structure, where all the benefits of that corporation go to the people at the top of that organization, and a co-op style organization where you have distributed decision making and distributed benefit. There's no doubt in my mind that one of those things is much better than the other. And as a path to library socialism, I think it would be, so if we're using library socialism to refer to like a perfect utopia, then I think we certainly co-ops are sort of a prefigurative path as part of like a complementary ecology of tactics that I can think of no reason to exclude. And yeah, I think there's different structures around co-ops. Like like a housing co-op might be structured a certain way, or like a variety of ways, or like a workplace co-op might be structured a variety of ways. And I don't have that like granularity of detail of knowledge about all of that that I'd like to have to be able to pull apart right now. But I think there's also better or worse within co-ops as well.
There's evidence too that co-ops, I was looking this up just now, co-ops compared to conventional businesses have lower hazard rates for workers, and they have early survival and medium lifespans of the business meet or exceed that of conventional businesses, and they have comparable long-term survival rates, meaning it might be slightly lower, but they're saying it's comparable. And they're generally better at weathering economic recessions because it's an easier contraction, and there's the burden is shared more equally among people. So they're actually like a really successful thing already. It's just not easy to start them and do them in society right now because they're already not the norm, and they're already just kind of seen as like a high investment and risky and things in ways that they're actually like not, according to data. So like worker co-ops in general, I think are really good for all the obvious anti-capitalist, anti-hierarchical reasons, but they're also just like effective ways to have a business and to participate in earning your living, like in this society that we already exist in. Like we live in a capitalist society, so if you can get in on a worker co-op with some other people that is that you trust and that like you want to work with, that could be a really good thing for your life, and not just for making society better, which I think it does too. But I think both of those elements are part of it, part of why co-ops are good.
Yeah, it could be like a positive foothold as part of a variety of footholds that we use to sort of pull each of us individually, but also society as a whole towards better frontiers. So in that vein, it is an example or path path to library socialism. Next question here is, how seriously do you take your roles as propagandists for a better society?
Kind of seriously. I think we don't want to take it too seriously, but we don't want to not take it seriously enough.
I take my role as a comedian very, very deadly seriously. Like if we started releasing content that was never funny, I'd be very, very upset.
I'd be fine with that.
No, but I mean, I don't like the word propaganda. Like if you're in, we have two words for the same concept: propaganda, which is the pejorative term, and public relations, which is the positive PR sanitized version of the same word. They were both of these terms were invented by Edward Bernays within a span of a couple of years. And public relations was the type of propaganda that you sell to corporations, and propaganda is what your political enemies do to deceive you. I consider myself more of a public relations person than I'm a propagandist. But I do take it seriously that we do want to challenge society and the problems with society. I'm not saying challenge society like Joker. I'm not gonna bomb a hospital or whatever, shoot a TV host. but we want to challenge the issues in society seriously, and I feel like I've got a responsibility to do that in our work, and also to help other people to do the same thing. So I do take that actually quite seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. The question hits me in two different ways. Like if I'm thinking about how much the show has grown and how many people are actually listening to us now, like I definitely feel a responsibility to take like the information that I'm giving out more seriously than maybe I would have in the past, where it just felt a bit more conversational, or like I could throw out whatever idea was on my mind. Whereas now I'm like, oh yeah, the people take what we say seriously, and that's like that there's a level of trust there that I need to respect and think about. But on the other hand, when I think about like a serious propagandist or even like a serious political theorist, like I don't like to imagine myself in that role. Like the comedy elements do play a pretty big part in it, and just in that, like, we present a lot of arguments and things on the show, but I don't think we generally are doing like full on philosophy where we're trying to like make sure we're not using any like what do you call those when you argument bad fallacies.
We're not using any argument bads on the show.
Sometimes instead of responding to arguments by people we don't like, we'll repeat their argument and then just kind of snicker at each other and laugh, and then start mocking the argument and making fun of it. And like a motivated listener could extract a counter argument from the uncharitable way that we're characterizing the opponents and making fun of them. But that's not really serious political philosophy when done that way. I think we do that sometimes, but it gets mixed in with comedy and things. Like I think it would be a mistake to think that we're like handing down some truth all the time, or that we're like, or even that we're
we're always handing down perfect truth.
Yeah, we've taken that posture a lot on the show, but I'm starting to feel a bit more weird about it, just again because of how many people are listening and being like, oh yeah, we got to the bottom of it, folks, we did it. I don't know, it's like, it's fun and it's jokey, but like actually we're just two normal people who like thinking about this stuff, like liked arguing about this stuff online and joking around with each other, and then we're like, hey, what if we record it? So yeah, I don't know, like obviously we have to take it seriously to some degree, but the form of a comedy show also necessitates not taking it that seriously.
And I think the show would be worse if we took it more seriously in that way. I mean, if we were meeting up to try to like issue decrees that were all perfectly, every word is just so, and just like we know we're solving this issue and it's being put to bed quite seriously, I think that would be it'd be a worse show. And I think there are sort of shows like that in that vein, or
yeah, like I don't want serious library socialists to sound sometimes like no offense to anyone, but some political like people sound where they use like very similar verbiage all the time, and there's this like robotic-ness feeling to it sometimes, where you feel like people are just there's this one right answer and they're repeating it. Like I don't want that vibe, and like maybe it's inevitable to some degree that people will take what we say and like repeat it a bit too much, or like without openness to other ideas. But like, yeah, just generally I think there's benefits to not taking your political ideology super seriously.
It's because the word serious is doing so, like there's so much to the word serious.
Yeah, different connotations.
Like I take it seriously in that I acknowledge the severity of the situation we're in. Like there's a reason why I feel motivated to talk about this stuff and work through this stuff instead of, like, we could, I guess, hypothetically do a comedy show where, or a talk and joking around show where we're talking about the latest like TV show. We've got like a Talking Dead type thing. We just watch Walking Dead every week and do a podcast and stuff. And I'm sure it'd be like pretty good. Like we could probably make it pretty good. But the reason that we're doing it this way is because there's a real like severity of the moment that we're in, and that there's politics is important. But yeah, to pick up on what Aaron was saying, like I never ever see us as like writing I don't see this show as us very, very seriously contributing like political polemics to the discourse. I mean, that may be something that I would do outside of the show, or if I wanted to do it.
I've had the experience. I have a friend who is like more right-wing libertarian leaning, who used to listen to the show sometimes, and like we would talk about it. And one thing he mentioned more than once that really got on his nerves was that on certain topics, he felt like at the point in the episode where we got to like the crux of the issue, like the most important argument, that's the point when we say it and we start laughing and we don't really respond to it. We just start like joking about it because to us it's just like so ridiculous. Like we don't want to spend the time acknowledging this like right-wing libertarian version of the argument. We're just like, of course it's stupid. We can't house all homeless people. All right, yeah, you know, I don't know specifically what it was, but he mentioned that being a thing that really like annoyed him. So like our show's directed to a certain audience, obviously, and not everyone's gonna love it, and like it's not going to be super convincing to a lot of people who have like pretty different views than us.
Although we try a bit some of the time.
Sometimes.
But to return to the question and answer it directly, how seriously do you take your roles as propagandists for a better society? Deadly fucking serious.
I'm going to say 37, but I'll let you decide what that's out of.
37 is the number. I like that.
37 seriously. Under library socialism, what would students learn in math class instead of household budgeting? I don't know if I learned that much budgeting in math class. Like it was some of the examples would be budget things, but sometimes the examples would be like calculating the square footage of a room, or you know, we want to cut this pie into some, like there's lots of examples that aren't household budgeting. But one example I did think of that might be interesting would be more like resource budgeting. Like imagine you're on a spaceship going to this place and it has 1,000 gallons of water and a regenerative capacity of turning dirty water into clean water of like 3 gallons per hour. Showers take this many gallons. You need this many gallons to drink per day, whatever for the crew. Like how long of a trip can you do? Or like how many showers per day could you take? Or like things like, there's lots of non-monetary numerical things that you could make students do, or that students could choose to do in the math class that they want to be at. In a perfect society.
In a different vein, but also sort of similar, something else that came to mind for me, just because is the way that ballots are counted in very responsive democratic scenarios, where you have, say, like long form ballots, ranked ballots, proportionality, this sort of stuff. This is something I think that should be sort of like entwined into the school system more from a young age. Having kids participate in democratic schooling would be really beneficial in like building their democratic consciousness and allowing, making it more possible to democratize society broadly as a whole. And I think there's some complex, when it comes to like different voting systems, there's different sort of like complex mathematical scenarios you can lay out, and presumably that we would create even newer and more advanced forms of voting systems, which would give new context, new examples of non-mathematical household budgeting to use as examples in math class. But also, I don't know about, if we're talking about library socialism as like the final the final form of society and stuff like that. I think for a long time it's really likely that household budgeting is going to be part of the human experience. So I'm not ready to predict the day where households don't have any form of budget. I think there's a good chance we'll maintain some form of that for at least quite some time.
Yeah, I think so too.
But having a household budget where you actually have enough resources to live all the time and you have enough resources to do things is like a still pretty good step. I mean, I don't like my problem. You know, like the point of socialism isn't to abolish.
To abolish household budgeting.
No, yeah.
Another thing I just thought of, though, that this question made me think of, is that it is actually interesting how much of the math that I have to do on a day-to-day basis has to do with money. Like it's mostly money. Like, how much do I have? What can I spend on this? If I spend this, how much do I have left?
Yeah, I'm almost never,
dealing with Patreon, how much is this amount in American when we convert it to Canadian? Money number stuff. I don't do a ton of non-money related math. Getting rid of money might reduce the amount of math people have to do.
Yeah,
but there might just be other math that pops up that...
That is true, yeah, actually. Yeah, because I don't know the last time that I was like, I'm going to measure the two sides of this and then figure out the surface area. Although I'm glad that I know how to do that in a pinch.
I used to do that a lot when I was doing hotel maintenance. Spoiler for one of that other question, what we did before this. But, like, yeah, I did have to measure things and calculate area sometimes. But, yeah, it's usually money.
And also just an idea around math in school is, like, how do we ensure that we're having a responsible mathematics education where youth are getting the level of mathematical fluency that is not just necessary, but not just like the absolute minimum, but like a reasonable amount, without also like overburdening as part of the school curriculum, like this, like the idea that part of the basic math you learn will be some like weird, complex, unusable, never use shit for someone who is not pursuing a career in those relevant, like where the average person isn't using sin, cos, and tan. I'm not saying that we should take that out of the school curriculum. I'm just saying we should acknowledge that like there might be different focuses for certain kids.
Yeah, absolutely. What are some of Sean and Aaron's absolute favorite books of all time and recently? Fiction or nonfiction?
So I don't read a lot of fiction these days. It's actually my New Year's resolution to read some more fiction again. It's like been a while. I watch fiction, but I don't read it. Something about reading a fictional book doesn't capture my brain the same way that a nonfiction book does, where I read a lot of nonfiction books. I read almost no fiction books. Some people think that makes me an insane monster. I think it's cool and normal. But when I was younger, I really, really enjoyed reading Kurt Vonnegut books. Kurt Vonnegut was like my favorite author. And also along those lines, I really, just to maybe sidestep a bit too, I really liked Watchmen when I was young, the graphic novel. Achewood was my favorite webcomics type of reading. And Calvin and Hobbes was like a huge part of my childhood also. So on the fiction side, that's pretty much what I'm dealing with. I can't even name like another fiction book I've read.
My experience with fiction books is that the beginning is usually a bit of a slog. Like you have to get into it, and then once you start caring, then it's downhill and it's easy.
Mm-hmm. That's no problem. That's probably it.
You just got to force your way through the beginning. Yeah. I haven't been reading a lot of nonfiction books recently, only just like skimming things for the show, or like sometimes like full on reading. I read almost all of the Bullshit Jobs book when we did that. I read a huge chunk of the Haitian Revolution book I was using. But generally I don't like pick up nonfiction books and just read them. Favorite fiction recently was probably the Broken Earth trilogy by Nora Jemisin. It's Lida recommended it to us when she was on the show, Lida Gold, in our Sweetie Trek episode, and it's a like fantasy trilogy, but like unlike a lot of fantasy books that are very like medieval Europe and like kings and horses and wizards and like that kind of stuff, it's more of like a post-apocalyptic thing. It's a really like imaginative universe, but it's also really really well written, and it's a really really personal book about like, or series I guess, about a mother and her daughter. And also there's like the way magic people are treated. There's like a bunch of parallels with like slavery and like systemic oppression stuff there, that she's working through in the book. They're really really good. I just saw in the Beautiful Genius Garden someone posted a quote or a page, a bit from one of her other books that I haven't read. That was really good. But yeah, the Broken Earth trilogy is like amazing. All three of those books won the Hugo Award 3 years in a row, and they deserved it. So those were the books I would recommend.
Yeah, and when it comes to nonfiction, I recently publicly endorsed my favorite book. It's actually just my favorite book, Inventing the Future, by Nick Cernicek and Alex Williams. It's my favorite piece of theory that I've read, I think, of all time. Recently, I'm trying to think if there's anything else I've read recently that I can throw a big endorsement out for. I read recently. I'm just gonna think about the books that I've read recently because it's easier than picking favorites. I read New Dark Age. It's like a verso book about tech infrastructure, and just like a variety of sort of like weird worst case scenario things about the sort of new world that we're entering. Something I've been thinking about for a while, which is like the technological the technological society that we're now in is different than anything in history, and what does it mean? And so I read this book, New Dark Age, and part of what it talks about is like, for example, our information communications technology infrastructure is a sort of like patchwork. So our society's become really reliant on the internet, but the internet is also very vulnerable to things like natural disasters and stuff. Cutting off people from the grid is one of the things that it gets out in the book. Another random thing that it mentions that I thought was crazy is just like that turbulence is increasing, the amount of planes that have deadly turbulence is going up over time, and the reason for this is because more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere causes more turbulence on planes. I had no idea about this, and I learned this from this book, that so as we veer closer to a climate apocalypse caused by too much carbon in the atmosphere, at the same time, domestic and international flights, but in particular international flights, are going to face more rates of turbulence and more rates of deadly turbulence, where people are thrown from their seats, have broken arms or necks, and so on. So I don't know if it's my favorite book of all time, but I recently read it and I enjoyed it. It's called New Dark Age.
And if any of you have children, or even if you just enjoy reading books directed at children, get your hands on the Animorphs series and read them. There's like 50 of them, but they're short books, and they're super good. Like, yeah, make your kids good. What will we struggle for once library socialism is achieved and the world is saved?
Well, the motherfuckers at the top of library socialism aren't to be trusted.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to say specifically what will go wrong, but like I assume there will be things going wrong. It's one reason, like when we do the sketches, we always like to be like, and it was achieved, but there was this horrible dystopian element, and like we probably play it up a bit for like the comedy and stuff, but like the point there a lot of the time is that, you know, pushing for this one thing, this injustice, and like finally seeing it rectified, there's going to be other potential injustices or other things. But like, if I take the question at face value of we've accomplished all those struggles, and like people have readily available strategies to get all of their needs met, just period, all of them. The library is perfect. There's no corruption at the top, and it just works. The system works as far as material concerns are. As far as material concerns are concerned, I guess the we're at utopia, or what would seem like a utopia from the perspective of our current society. I think in a world like that, a lot of the struggle is going to be surrounding social issues and like emotional issues. I talked about this a bit in the convenience episode, like responding to the conservative idea that having things be too convenient is going to degrade your character, because we need struggle necessarily in order to like bump up against and to make ourselves better, to build character. And the problem of like figuring out what should people do with all their time when there's nothing that they have to do anymore because everything's taken care of on that base level is actually like a pretty difficult problem, that I think the conservative people are right to point out that it could be an issue. It would probably be an issue. It's an issue already for some people to have their material needs taken care of in various ways, to figure out like what do I want to do, like what's worthwhile anymore. I think like that kind of like existential struggle, like struggle against ennui, struggle against meaninglessness, is going to be the thing, because that's something that is sort of individual. Like each person has to figure that out for themselves, like existentially, meaningfully. Like you have to figure out what you want to do and what you feel is going to make you feel like your life is worthwhile. That's not something we can set up like a ticking clock, like getting material needs met that works intergenerationally for everyone. This is something that everybody is going to have to tackle for themselves, no matter what kind of society we live in. And I think that's a lot to handle in a lifetime. Like I think there's a lot there for people to do and struggle for, like to the extent that struggle is good and meaningful and necessary. I don't think we'll run out. I think there's a lot there.
Mm-hmm. And I think the particular struggles that we would face, like politically, are hard to predict because we don't know sort of like what way history is going to unfold, or like what we're going to be able to achieve first or second, and how this sort of like complementary ecology of tactics, ecology of steps forward is going to all intersect. But like I suspect that the process of democratizing society meaningfully is going to take a very long time. And I suspect that like we could achieve library socialism in that, okay, now the world is a confederation of municipalist city-states that now function primarily through a library lending system. But even within that context, that might not necessarily encompass a directly democratic society. That might still have an ecological impact, which is unsustainable. That might have that there might be patriarchal gender relations. Like there's a number of challenges. So assuming that all of those things are done, there's also like there's the issue. There's like the issue of people's role in the world, but also giving everyone the capacity. Not giving everyone the capacity, giving everyone the opportunity to use their capacity. So like, how do we maximize our use of human potential? How do we maximize every individual achieving their highest level of achievement, whatever that would mean, and whatever value structure could give us an idea of like what sort of achievements that would be. So there's going to continue to be technological and scientific discovery, innovation, etc., that needs to undergo for a long time. Democracy is a process which I think probably shouldn't be completed, like the meta process of creating better and better democracy. I'd be surprised if we reached an equilibrium on that where like no more democratic reforms ever needed. Like it just seems like that just seems out of touch with everything that I've ever read about like history and just like my experience in actual politics.
Yeah, it just generally, like, I see utopia as something that we aim at more so than something that is achieved. Like, even if you achieve the things that you thought were utopian when you began, it like just won't seem that utopian anymore. Like running water, the example I always use. So yeah, like the idea of what will happen once we achieve utopia almost seems to be kind of missing the point. Like it's what do we want to strive towards more so than like we could set it up exactly like this.
We could also talk about it in a way of like a minimum program and a maximum program. So once the so like the minimum program is like the very least that we hope to achieve, and the maximum program is total complete utopia forever, 10,000 years of world peace. We could call the minimum program library socialism, and then the answer is, what will we struggle for once library socialism is achieved? Well, we've achieved the minimum program, so now we need to do the work, the deep work of the maximum program, which might take hundreds, if not thousands, of years. What are each of Sean and Aaron's favorite films of 2019? So I had to just Google like what movies came out in 2019 because I know which movies I saw recently that I liked, but I don't.
Yeah, which ones for 2019? Yeah.
I think out of the 2019 movies, my favorite that I've seen is Parasite. I really enjoyed it. I also liked Knives Out quite a bit, but I think Parasite's better. Hated Star Wars Episode 9, so that's definitely not a fave. Joker, I was actually kind of let down by. I expected better after hearing everyone talk about it. I just thought it was sort of corny, like just not that. I really got in this headspace with Joker when I was watching it. Something early in the movie, it was like there was something tripped me up. I was like, this is directed by the guy who directed The Hangover. And it was like when his coworker was like a little person and it was sort of like played for like a weird surreal laugh. I was like, am I watching Hangover 4? What the fuck's going on? But it had its moments. It's just like I expected. I heard it was so hyped up about it. I was let down.
Yeah. Joker was okay. I wrote a bunch of things. I had a hard time picking a movie. Some of my favorite movies. There's this one called Knives and Skin, which is like this neon drenched, like bisexual lighting, blue and pink, atmospheric haunting movie that it's kind of like a Twin Peaks vibe, but like mixed with like Riverdale aesthetics, almost like the TV show Riverdale. And it has some like interesting feminist stuff in it and like haunting renditions of pop songs. It's about a high school girl who's killed, like similar to Twin Peaks. But it's really good. It's a really like just interesting movie. And then another one that was kind of weird that I liked, more of a comedy, is called Greener Grass. It's also like super surreal. It's like this like bubblegum, like brightly colored suburbia world, but it's everything's kind of off. Like people drive golf carts around and they all have braces, and like one of the first scenes in the movie, the two main characters are these two women who have this weird passive aggressive like competition thing going on in their bizarro suburban environment, and one of them just asks for the other one's baby and she's like, oh sure, you can have my baby, and then she's like resentful about it for the rest of the movie that the other woman has her baby. There's this guy who's like really into drinking his pool water. There's some like it's a bizarre movie. It's a lot of fun. Les Miserables, Les Miserables, a new movie that came out about the race riots in France a few years back. Is really good. Midsummer was like amazing for like a horror movie. Yeah, I have some other movies I liked, but I'll probably just mention those ones.
I watched a movie last night I liked, but it's actually from 2018. It's a Netflix movie. It's called A Futile and Stupid Gesture, and it's about the creation of the National Lampoon magazine, in particular, one of the creators of it, Doug Kenny. And it's I should say that it's not like high cinema. It's not Kino. It's not the finest shit in the world, but as like a historical story about this National Lampoon newspaper, which was like this very subversive comedy at the time. It's directed by David Wayne, who's a member of the comedy group Stella, which I'm a big fan of. And if you haven't seen the Stella shorts or the Stella TV series, which had a single series on Comedy Central like 10 years ago, if you can find a torrent of it, it's about three idiots who always wear suits, and it is really, really funny. But I like a futile and stupid gesture, and I watched it last night. And I found it sort of touching and just really interesting. Like if you're interested in comedy history, there's a lot of stuff to bite into there around like the creation of Animal House and stuff.
The movie I watched last night, not from 2019, that I really liked, was a horror movie. It's called The Babadook. And it's like a lot of horror movies, like an extended metaphor for trauma, but like it's really well done. The performance of the little kid in the movie is amazing, as well as it's mostly about a kid and the mother. I don't want to give away details, but like the ending is really, really good.
And just in the same way that I'm like a nonfiction over fiction guy, the way it's shaped up over history, I'm a TV guy over movie guy. I don't know why it happened. I just watch a lot more TV, and I'm more obsessive about like keeping up with it than movies. And I've been watching the new season of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and I think it's like the best season in a while. It's like really, really funny.
Yeah, I generally like TV better too, because you like, it was almost like that thing I mentioned with the books. Like it takes a while to get invested in it, like meeting these new characters, and I feel like there's like upfront work every time you watch a movie of like figuring out who these people are and caring about them, whereas with a TV show you mostly do all that work in the first episode and then you're good from then on, and like new people kind of drip in, or new storylines and things. But like if you're invested, you're usually invested early on, and then it's like falling downhill, like you just want more all the time. So it's easy to watch TV shows, whereas movies, it's like, oh, do I want to do this? And anyway.
I spent most of my recreational movie watching time in 2019 watching through Sopranos for the first time, and it's so good. Like I knew people said it was the best show and stuff, but like it really blew me away. It's like I'm sort of like tempted to rewatch it again instead of watching something else. Like it's just so interesting, and so well done, and just like really, really, I think a masterpiece in a way that I knew it was good. I heard it was good, but I was just really surprised at how good it was. Let's see. Can you take a stab at outlining a realistic timeline of our current society evolving to realize the maximal program of library socialism / communalism? That's a good question. Realistic timeline.
I'm just going to answer this first quickly.
Oh, sure.
No, I can't. Maybe Sean can. But like, I have no idea what that a realistic timeline. Like, I don't know. I could make some stuff up, but like this kind of thing, like I don't think about this very much. It doesn't. I don't want to say it doesn't interest me, but it just seems so theoretical, or so. Like I'm immediately just like, I can't outline a realistic timeline for what we could accomplish in the next year if everybody got on. Like there's so many ifs, and I don't know. It as soon as I try to think about it, my brain collapses in on like way too many possibilities, and I'm just like, no, futile exercise. But that's potentially partly my unwillingness to want to deal with that. I feel like you might be more interested in imagining something there.
Yeah, I'm just thinking through the. So I mean, I'm just gonna think about the minimum program first. So that's like an official sort of. That's like transitioning, where the society's more attempting to embody these values, and we're within a realm of more greater or lesser good, rather than the realm of greater or lesser evil. For the minimum program, I want to say if we're lucky, we could get it in a couple decades, but more likely in the next 100 years sometime. And it's going to have to do a lot with the climate crisis. And from my understanding, although I hear conflicting things on this, is that if we don't change our course when it comes to emissions, it's roughly the 2080s territory, where you're looking at like really, really serious consequences, like people not being able to leave their homes in the summertime and stuff like that. So I think and there's the IPCC window of 12 years now, 11 years, because it's been 1 year. If we get really lucky and we do a really, really great job, and we as activists on the left and stuff figure some of our shit out, to use our resources effectively and respect people, and not burn through people like commodities, but to have renewable activism rather than burnout activism, and come together in a unified way as part of a coherent strategy. The best case scenario I can think of is within 10 years for sort of a minimal program. Might be longer, probably longer, maybe much longer. And for maximal program, it's maximal is supposed to be like perfect, right? So like these processes, we could get to something that feels like a maximal program to us in our grandchildren's lifetime, maybe. But a true maximal program, you're talking hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Yeah. Do either of you have any pets? No, I don't. I kind of want one, but it's hard to find a place that will rent to you with pets in Vancouver, because it's such a landlord's market.
Yeah, I'm looking at getting a dog right now, but I don't have permission from my landlord yet, and it's a lot of responsibility. I used to have cats and dogs growing up, and my like like my sisters and my parents have animals. I like will see them there and stuff, but renting small apartments in Vancouver, it's never been that great. I'm in a place right now where I think I might be able to get pets. I just need to like request it from my landlord and do a deposit. It's going to be a whole thing. And he might say no, but I want to. I really want a dog. Like, I really like dogs.
I always wanted a dog growing up, but my parents weren't down. And yeah, I think now I might get a cat just because of the less work thing. I don't know. It's such a trade-off, because I love the love of the dog, but I like the less work thing of the cat.
I'm allergic to cats, so I could get some cats, but like some more hypoallergenic ones if I was like being careful and stuff. But I think I'm just gonna go with the dog when I get around to it, when I get the opportunity, because the landlordism and the property relations have actually kept me from having a dog thus far, literally speaking.
How would you recommend one get started with opening a local alternative library? Are there tactics outside of starting a GoFundMe? Does this mean like an alternative library, like different kinds of books, or more like tool libraries or other kinds of things? I guess it could all be a similar question.
My guess is the latter, but the like sort of alternative in what it lends was how I read it. But
yeah, I was thinking like an anarchist book library, things like that. People do niche libraries, niche book libraries. Either way, like, yeah, you're going to need some location and startup costs. I don't know. I don't know exactly what to recommend to you. GoFundMe is an interesting idea. But I think you might have difficulty promoting that, like to the extent that you need it.
Under our system, you either need to generate profit or you need to seek out donations. So if you want, so I used to work as a fundraiser for political parties, and There's like books and stuff you can read about perfecting this, about how to ask people for money. The basic, so like if you're talking about, if you want to get funding, a GoFundMe type thing might work. But also a good way to do it is you say, like, start with a petition. So you collect petitions with phone numbers saying that there's a need for this type of library. You go door to door, get a group of people, or go out on the street, collect all these phone numbers. So now you've got a list of people who have self-identified as agreeing with, so this petition isn't to give to anyone. This petition is to collect phone numbers from people you're going to ask money from. This is how political parties work already. I hate to pull the veil back. Those petitions don't go anywhere. So you can use these phone numbers, and the same works for any activist organization. I highly recommend this tactic. It actually really, really works like a motherfucker. So because these people sign it, they give you their phone number, and they're like, I care about this. I care about libraries. I think we should have a new tool library in this neighborhood. And then you can call them after some time, and you put on a little charm, and you put on a little bit of cheekiness, and you say, hey, like, we're actually going to build this library. We don't have support from the city from it. We're going to do it grassroots. Do you think we could sign you up to donate $50 today? Oh, no, you won't donate $50. Well, that's fine. A lot of people who can't afford $50 will give us $10 a month, and that way you can help finance the library over the long term. And if you give us $10 a month, we'll actually give you access to the library ahead of other people, or we'll give you a membership to the library, and you can work out sort of a strategy around this. So that's like a hybrid profit generation fundraising model where you have a recurring payment. So you could set up a library, like I think a tool library, it's reasonable to ask people to pay a monthly fee. Maybe it could be on a sliding scale, or you could come up with exceptions based on people who are in very dire financial situations. But
I think the Vancouver Tool Library is like a membership fee, or maybe it's a yearly fee, and then you have to replace it if you break it, kind of thing. I think that's what I can't remember if it's a yearly fee or just an initial fee, but it's something like that.
Yeah. So so yeah, that's one way to think about it. Like a GoFundMe would be great if you could get the startup capital from it, but then you have to pay ongoing rent costs and stuff for the physical space, and you also need a place that people can actually access. So the rent's probably going to be quite expensive, and one of the more expensive areas of whatever city you're doing this out of is going to be needed to ensure that accessibility. Unless you live in one of those towns that's like very much a car town, where people can just go to the outskirts or whatever. But in here in Vancouver, at least, it's very public transit oriented, and there's some areas of town where people will always go to, and there's areas of town where really you have to like entice people to get them over there.
This is one thing, and like I'm not against the idea of like alternative libraries at all, but like also some libraries are doing things like opening tool libraries inside of them, and if you can go to your library and do that, then like you already have a space, you're gonna have this municipal funding source, there's going to be a whole infrastructure there for you already. So like, again, depending on what kind of alternative library you mean and where you live and what the local municipal and library politics are like, that could be more or less feasible. But it's definitely also an option to look into, because if you can plug into the library thing that already exists, they're going to have a lot of that taken care of already.
Yeah, like the staffing stuff. So if it's like an anarchist library that you want to do, there's the thing about requesting books we mentioned, but it's also a possibility that you could like talk to the board that runs the library or whatever, who makes this sort of decision, and say, hey, we want to fundraise to donate a collection of books. We want to create like a new part of the library that has all this like anarchists and communists and et cetera literature. We want to give it its own section, and we'll finance all the books, all this sort of stuff. Would you be interested in that? Is it possible to do that? I think in some places you could find libraries that are willing to take on a donation of a bunch of books. There's a bunch of internal politics and stuff like that, and you have to, like as with anything, basically, you have to sort of power map, do research, ask people. One of the first steps of organizing is often connecting to people who know the terrain that you want to talk about, and building maps with them about building a power map of the organization, but also building just knowledge that people involved with the organization would have that you wouldn't have as an outsider. They might say like, oh, if you want to do this sort of thing, there's this one board member who's really going to love that idea, so you should get him on board with it right away. But there's this other guy and he's just going to hate it. So I think we need to figure out a way to get this vote passed when he's on vacation in January. for example. But I think it is worth looking to see if do we need an alternative library? Because I think an alternative library should be our second choice behind commandeering the existing libraries if we have that option. Just for resource, like effective resource use, like staffing the library and stuff could all be handled by the municipality instead of by the people who are organizing this sort of thing. And you could get the same benefits in the end for less work and resource. And you could still build up those lists of people, phone numbers, get them to donate, all this sort of stuff. Like you can still build that infrastructure, Wrongtopia Pro Library Society, like the Radical Librarians Local or whatever. There's ways to do that and interact with existing systems, and I don't think it's a compromise. You can save time and energy. You can save time and energy without compromising your values. I think sometimes it's worth investigating those sort of things.
What led you guys to go into podcasting, and what were you doing before you started Seriously Wrong? So I basically, since I graduated high school with like a few jobs in between, I spent 8 years doing hotel maintenance. I got like really into that job because I had a lot of downtime to like read and listen to podcasts, and I wasn't supervised because I always hated people telling me what to do at work or feeling like I was constantly watched. I worked at a few jobs where I felt like I was constantly being watched, and it was like one of the worst experiences of my life. So I really settled into hotel maintenance. Up until like 2 years ago, I had been like doing less of it as we started getting some money, and then about 2 years ago I left that job and then was for a while making up the difference between the show and the rest of the money I needed to live by doing DoorDash or like Postmates, like delivering food to people with my car. But I haven't been doing that much recently, as the show's been enough to pay the minimum amount I need to keep paying rent and all that. As we've been building up to Sean also getting that now, almost there.
Yeah. Before I was doing this, I mean, I'm still doing the stuff that I was doing before this. The show's been like really successful recently, but we're not at the point yet really where we can afford rent and
not for both of us.
Yeah. But so I still work part-time on and off at my previous job. But I was originally, after high school, I worked really briefly at Whole Foods and Lush Cosmetics. Whole Foods as a cashier and Lush Cosmetics in their factory. Hated both those jobs. They're both fake woke bullshit, like oppressive like that's actually where I sort of became radicalized against capitalism. The experience of being a worker under capitalism was really felt in both those places, more so than my other job. I also worked for 6 years in the like 5.5 years, because there were some gaps, in the downtown east side as a front desk person for low-income housing, government subsidized housing in the poorest postal code in Canada, and some interesting experiences. I worked night shift there most of the time. I still have like weird sleep issues as a result of working night shift, and I saw a lot of weird stuff. I ended up leaving that job because a muscular deaf man threw a brick at me. And there's a longer story there, as you can tell, but basically my job was to talk people out of doing stuff like that. And when I was faced in the situation where I had to talk someone out of being violent towards me and they can't hear, I was like fucked. I thought I was going to die. So I left that job, and through that got connected to political fundraising and political work for political parties. Ended up helping run a few campaigns. I've been a campaign manager a few times recently. First for the Coalition of Progressive Electors in Vancouver. This was last year in the fall, or 2018 in the fall rather. We elected 4 out of 7 of our socialist candidates, including Jean Swanson, who we had on the show, I think episode 122. She's just absolutely amazing, one of my favorite politicians in the world. And then last year, I had the honor of being the campaign manager for Sven Robinson, who's a absolutely legendary Canadian socialist figure. If you Google him, you can find out a little bit of what he was able to achieve as being the only elected socialist in Canada for a long time. And unfortunately, his comeback bid to run that I was leading, we didn't make it across the finish line. We fell about 1,500 votes short in the end, so it was pretty tough. It was really like a long, arduous campaign, and then to end with losing is awful. Like, if you've ever done a long-term job that takes a lot of work, imagine that you're like making a car. It's a beautiful car. You love this car. This car's going to be so great once it's running. But then at the end, an election is like there's a 50-50 chance your car just breaks, and then this evil car comes and destroys everything you love. That's what elections are like. And that's what happened last year with the Sven campaign. So I still do that sort of stuff on and off. And then my day job was a constituency assistant to a politician as well, Bowen Ma on the North Shore, who's like, again, awesome. But I no longer work in her office. I go there to help sometimes with some like certain targeted outreach things and with some communications.
As far as what led me to go into podcasting, I kind of have always wanted to try to do creative things, and like if I could make a living doing that, that's always kind of been what I wanted to do. It was more originally focused on like I wanted to make movies or write novels, like tell stories, and we do storytelling stuff on the show, obviously. But podcasting didn't exist when I was a kid, so it wasn't like my dream to be a podcaster. But it just kind of like happened once like I did some YouTube stuff in like 2011, 2012 that got a bit of people like watching videos that I made, and yeah, just the area of like stuff I could make at home and then put out on the internet and get immediate response, as opposed to like a movie or a book. You can't really do that. So it ended up in podcasting. I did a different podcast like very briefly before this that was like 10 episodes, and then Sean and I met and we decided to try a different one, to relaunch a podcast, and it just worked, and now we're doing it.
Yeah, and actually we met because a mutual friend of ours, he actually was the guy who sort of hipped us to Bookchin too. I met him through the Pirate Party. So I was a leader of the Pirate Party of Canada in 2012 when I was working the downtown east side on night shift. And so that was like an interesting sort of first foray into like electoral activism and like I think quite radical politics, with the abolition of copyright and online libraries, is how I'd refer to it now. And through a mutual friend of his, so I knew him, and then he knew someone who knew Aaron, and then because of that, Aaron's video, which was about the abolition of work, or Workers of the World Relax, like a Bob Black essay reading that he had done, a video, somehow ended up across my feed, and I really liked it, and then I saw that the person who shared it was like, this was made by my friend. So then I just like added Aaron, and then we were friends on Facebook for forever, like just in the post-Occupy, like very generous with friend requests place. And then eventually we ended up meeting up and finding out that we both were sort of thinking about doing a podcast, where he'd previously done one, and I'd been talking to people trying to find someone to do it with me. And yeah, like similarly, like I never dreamed, I was never like, oh, I can't wait to make podcasts. When I was a child, I never thought that would be it, or even radio. Like I guess there was like a little part of me like listening to morning radio and stuff, like, oh, I could do this would be fun, but never really a thing. It was more like when I was a teenager, it was like comedy writing and cartooning. I made the Ultimate Showdown. I made this cartoon, the Ultimate Showdown, which was like massively viral in 2015. Like we're millions of views, like tens of millions of views, like 60 million or something. I don't even keep up with where it's at. It keeps on getting more views all the time. It's like 10 years old now, 15 years old now. Yeah, 15. So so I animated that. I used to do animations and cartoons. But my big thing, the thing that I like really really liked and like I wanted to get into was more stuff like The Simpsons, Family Guy, maybe like the Venture Bros, home movies. Like that was the stuff that I watched that I was like really into when I was 14. And I really wanted to have a show like that. I really wanted to like be a showrunner, and I'd like listen to the commentaries on these shows and like hear writers talking about what it's like to be in the writers' room and stuff. And I just really identified with it. Like that was when I was a kid. Like that was the shit. I was like, this is what I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I did a lot of commentary listening to on movies. Like just really fascinated with the idea behind like making stuff, production. Like what is it like? What thought processes go into it? All that kind of stuff was always super interesting to me.
Actually, and on that note, if that sort of connects with you and like sort of how you think about media and stuff, that was part of really how I got a kick out of a Futile and Stupid Gesture, that Netflix movie, because it has that sort of like background interesting imagining making a comedy magazine in the 70s. It's like an appealing fantasy to me. So yeah, but once we started doing podcasting, it was sort of like we were both interested in politics. I pushed a little more to have more comedy elements beyond just like joking around and like doing sketches and stuff. I had recently done some comedy sketches with a friend in audio for the first time, and felt like it was really fun and wanted to do it again. And Aaron was a good sport about it at first, even though it wasn't like his dream.
Yeah.
And then it just turned out to be something that was like really fun, and that we have a good vibe together with it, and good complementary comic sensibilities and stuff.
Yeah, I was never interested in, when I'm talking about making movies, writing not comedy stuff, like genre stuff, sci-fi, horror, maybe drama things. But like, I liked comedy things, but I never had much interest in making comedy things.
Yeah, to respond to Vanessa there, yeah. So Neil Saraga was my internet friend at the time. We used to chat over AOL Instant Messenger in like 2015. Like when I say internet friend, we weren't like super tight, but like we talked regularly, and we collaborated a few times. So the Ultimate Showdown was written primarily by Neil, and obviously like I don't want to like he did, part of the reason it was so successful because of his incredible music. But just an interesting little history, if you both are familiar with Neil Cicierega and Seriously Wrong, is the idea for the Ultimate Showdown, not the title, but the idea came from me, because I thought that Newgrounds would really, really like it. I thought that Newgrounds audiences would respond to it, and I wanted to make a viral video. And I pitched that to Neil. He liked the idea, started writing the song, and then we debated over who would win in the end. Neil was right and I was wrong. Neil suggested Mr. Rogers. I suggested Chuck Norris. So Neil was right. I was 14, so please, no tomatoes. Another thing too is that when Shaq is beat by Aaron Carter, that little joke at the beginning, that was my joke. He was like, who's going to beat Shaq? I'm like, obviously Aaron Carter, because Aaron Carter wrote a song called That's How I Beat Shaq. So that was the degree of my influence in
the storyline.
The storyline and writing of the song. But the animation was me. And actually, also to his credit, at the end, before it was released, I've been working on it for a month, like after school. I'm 14. I think he's probably 17 or 18 or something like that. And I sent it to him. And I was like, I think I'm pretty much done with this. I can't, like, I've been working on this so long. We need to release it. And he's like, I'll handle it from here. And he did some punch-up stuff that made it a lot better. Like, he just did some little tweaks and stuff, like a final sort of pass on the animation, tweak some things, and brought it up to the level that it was when it was released. So, big shout out to him, and his stuff is awesome to this day. Like, I'm not really in contact with him anymore. Like, we were never super tight, and it's just sort of like he's busy. He's like internet royalty. He does all this crazy shit. But like his mouth sound stuff is amazing. His Spirit Phone album was really good. He's an incredible animator. Just like I could only sing high praise for that guy. I'm a fan myself of the stuff that he does, and it's cool that I got to collaborate with him.
Would you rather pee a marble or poop a brick? I got an answer for this. I would rather pee a marble, and I can tell you why, which is both of those things are obviously too big for going through those holes. But the marble is smooth and round, and the bricks are like really rough, and like there's things like that would just tear it up. Like peeing a marble, like you could maybe it would be like a big kidney stone. I don't know.
I was thinking, I took a different tack. I was thinking shit a brick because I identify less with my asshole than my penis. And if my penis was badly damaged by pissing a marble, I'd be really choked.
Yeah.
If my asshole was destroyed, it's like no one cares. It's no one.
I think you would care. But also, how big a marble are we talking?
Yeah,
like,
how big a brick?
That's true.
It's important.
Yeah.
If we assume that it's maximally big to cause pain but not damage, I still might go with.
I don't know how you could do a brick without damage because of how rough they are on the outside.
They're small bricks.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It's not the size necessarily. It's the like. Take the tiniest chip of a brick and put like you're gonna cut yourself.
There's like mucus and stuff in the ass. There's mucus and stuff in there. Like it's meant to push stuff out. The penis isn't meant to. The urethra isn't meant to push through. Like I guess it's probably maybe pee marble is better. Like people suffer through the kidney stones and they're like spiky.
Yeah, I peed out a kidney stone once, but it was way smaller than a marble. It was like the size of this P on my keyboard, which I know you can't see, but like just like a tiny little, and it really hurt. So I don't know. I don't want to do either of them, obviously, but I was just trying to answer the question. As I think my urethra is stretched out enough by now to be. Well, yeah, if you're doing sounding, like people do stretch out their urethras, and like maybe if I had enough prep time. But I guess you could do fisting also to maybe we can move on from this question.
If we get adequate prep time, I'm down for either. I really enjoyed the episode where you mentioned Star Trek: The Next Generation and all the moments it portrays one form of utopia. Would you ever do a full episode on The Next Generation? I haven't watched enough Next Generation to feel like a pull to do that episode, and we always have so many great episode ideas. I'm not sure. If I were to guess, I'd say that we probably won't do that episode, unless I get like super into The Next Generation the way I got into Sopranos this year.
Yeah, I rewatched all of Next Generation a couple years ago. But like I would totally be down to do an episode on it, maybe if we had a guest who is interested in it, but it's not really a high priority for me. It would be a great opportunity to do a bunch of Sweetie Trek sketches though.
Oh yeah, I miss Sweetie Trek. It's been a while since
we could do some Sweetie Trek again. And we can probably combine this with the other Star Trek questions too down. Star Trek in hindsight is admittedly kind of neoliberal. Are there any better examples of post-scarcity utopia in fiction that you know of? It really depends which series you're on, like how good I think the politics of Star Trek is, like TNG being the best. Not that it's perfect. The new shows are the ones I would probably most call neoliberal, or I don't know what word I would use, but they're not what I love so much. Maybe I shouldn't judge Picard yet, but I'm not super impressed. It seems not fine, and I'll watch every episode, but I wasn't super impressed with it. Better examples of post-scarcity utopia. I guess the Culture series, the novels. I've never read them, but I have been recommended them enough times that they're apparently really good. I tried reading the first one and I didn't like it. And Lyda also mentioned that she didn't like the first one, but like a lot of people have told me that the first one isn't not a good representation of what it's about. There was barely any mention of the utopian society. People is kind of on the fringes or not mentioned a lot. Some of the other ones take place like in that world, which sounds really interesting. I'll get to them at some point. But there's not a ton of post-scarcity utopia in fiction because I think a lot of the times people have trouble imagining how to create tension and things in a world like that. And people often want to make commentaries on society the way it is now. So when there's futuristic worlds, it's like this world, but like something is way more, but we still have a lot of the same problems, rather than trying to do the imaginative work of like what different kinds of problems would we deal with in a society like that, which I think is like really interesting. But I don't know that there's a ton of literature like that out there. I know there's some other book series that I've had recommended to me that I don't know offhand, but in terms of like visual fiction like Star Trek, I don't know of a lot. If anyone in the chat knows a good utopian movie or TV show, like mention it, but I don't think there's a ton.
Yeah, I don't have enough experience to recommend anything, unfortunately. I can mention that I watched a couple episodes of the Star Trek TNG inspired show The Orville, and I thought it was pretty funny and good, but I haven't seen all of it, and it might still be neoliberal in ways.
Yeah, it probably lots of things. I just saw the sounding episode comment. I missed it. Probably not.
Sounding episodes on the
maybe
way.
a stream. Maybe we'll do a sounding stream.
Get some experts together.
It's better too with the visual things. We could demonstrate sounding on for everyone. I don't know where it's legal to stream that. Probably not YouTube. But.
Okay, so we've got like 10 minutes left here because we were hoping to do a 2-hour stream, and we've got a bunch of questions left. There are also the questions that got less upvote, so maybe we'll go through and try to get some quick answers to some of them before we wrap up here.
How are you guys so cool and nice? I just want to say we edit a lot, and also this isn't editing, but we're also still on, like we're performing in a sense, like it's a type of we're sitting at our laptops talking, but like I don't talk this much normally. Like you're getting a version of me that's not real. Not to say that I'm not cool and nice, but I think most people are cool and nice, and if I seem so cool and nice more so than other people, it's because I have some skills at being charming, and also that you're getting a curated version of us.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been cool, and I only learned to be nice later in my life. So if you're not nice, keep your chin up. It's possible to start being nice. There was actually, I'll tell this little story. In high school, there was a point where I just had this, I don't even know what inspired it. I just had this moment where, because I was sort of like an edgy kid, and we like make fun of each other and stuff. And I realized that I'd hurt people's feelings, that I'd crossed the line by making fun of them. They made fun of me and stuff. I was like a fat kid. People called me fat. I called them things and stuff. And I realized like, I didn't like being called fat, and other people seemed to be really upset when from some of the comments that I'd made in return. And that was sort of like the start of me trying to become more nice, but I apologize to some people and stuff, and
I've been a people pleaser my whole life, so there's that too. Like I'm pretty good at making people like me, just in general, so it's a skill I have.
At what cost though?
Don't want anyone to know that. It might make them not like me. This one's a really easy one to answer. I'd love to hear y'all's take on cultural appropriation. We did an episode on it a while back, which I think is still good. From what I remember what we said in it, I think it's good.
Yeah. Every episode's still good unless we're told otherwise, and no one has specifically told us. I've got some hints. I was like a couple episodes I wouldn't recommend people just because I'm like, I feel weird about it, but that's recently enough that it's probably pretty solid. Although I don't think it went into every nuance of the issue. There is more things that we could cover. There's no way that my job is automated, is automizable. Am I doomed to toil while the rest of you are living your best lives? No.
Oh, I was gonna say yes, but we'll thank you for it while we're drinking we'll drinks on the beach and
champagnes and martinis while you do.
Yeah, we'll toast to your honor while you're doing all the work. It can't be automated.
I think if a careful analysis shows that we're all doomed to toil. So, does that answer your question? But also I think we're gonna enter with automation. We're gonna enter a structural society where care work is more important. As we have an aging population, improvements in medical care and stuff, and also just a larger population, which means a larger population with severe disabilities that require assistance and stuff. Care work is going to expand and expand and expand to fill a lot of the holes of automation. So, although you are doomed to toil, trust us, we all are.
The 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 other thing I'd say is that I don't know what your job is, but I think some things are potentially automizable in ways that aren't easy to imagine, or that would require sort of restructuring things at a level one thing further back. I know that's super vague, and I don't know what your job is. It's possible that it is not automizable at all, but the good thing about automating so many other jobs is that people will have more free time to help with the stuff that can't be automated. So ideally, in the best future society, whatever things can't be automated, that work should be distributed fairly amongst the people who can and are willing and have an interest in doing it. So we don't want to set up a thing where we automated all the factory jobs, and now people doing non-factory jobs just have to keep working while the factory people get off. It should spread so that those people can now take more time off and get relief from those other workers who have free time now.
What languages do we speak? We were both English language speakers only.
I briefly tried to learn German before I went there with my family recently to visit family in Germany. I listened to some of those tapes on how to learn German. There's an episode recently I started by going "Willkommen," and that's because I was listening to German tapes. But I gave up pretty quickly, so I can say...
I think someone corrected our pronunciation on YouTube.
Yeah, he did. Or they did. I could mispronounce a couple other German words right now, but I
could mispronounce some French words. I took French for a couple of years.
Yeah, I know a bit of French too from school. I learned it in school because Canada, it's a second language, but I was oppositional to it the whole time, and I didn't want to learn it, so I really didn't.
Yeah, I regret it, but my French teacher was so awful that it really turned me off of learning French. I wish that I was fluent. That would be a great benefit to me. I feel bad we don't have more time to answer some of these questions, our opinion of participism, par-econ, par-poly, polyculturalism, and radical feminist kinship. I'm familiar with per-econ and per-polity, polyculturalism, and radical feminist kinship. I'd have to look up. But generally, I'm in participism. Good. I like participation. And I was reading a little bit about it recently for an upcoming episode, and how it intersects with sort of social ecology. There were some debates. There were some debates over between per-econ people and social ecology people, which someone linked us to in one of the bookchin groups. So yeah, sorry, I can't get deeper into that question.
I'm interested. I like all of I don't know those last two like you mentioned, but just in general, different visions of how a directly democratic society could work, or different visions of how a money system could work, like per-econ. I find that stuff always really stimulating, and I don't necessarily see them as in competition with each other, that people should endorse one and be against the other ones. I think we're going to have to experiment with a whole bunch of different kinds of things like this, and it's not going to end up looking like any one thing that was set out beforehand. There's going to be a lot of different good ideas and a lot of different democratic systems and things like that we can pick up and experiment with in the real world when we're seeing what actually works. So the more of this kind of stuff, the better, for sure.
Here's a nice quick answer to a question to respond to. Can we riot a little bit as a snack? Um, uh,
Can you? Are you asking can you or may you? Yes, you can. It's possible. Or are you
do you have to
saying
get
may
us to sign
you?
off on it before you do it? Because why do you need to deal us in this loop? I
But
don't.
yeah, you can physically you can. If you're the question is whether you may, I don't know if we're the right people to grant or ungrant permission on that. So,
Is it ethically permissible sometimes for people to participate in riots for political reasons? Depending on the context, absolutely yes.
yeah, for sure. It's the voices of the unheard, isn't that a thing?
Oh yeah, that's Martin Luther King. Yeah,
Oh yeah, great guy.
yeah, ethical scion of history. Um, Sean mentioned something in Discord about starting a community group. Is there anything which you'd feel comfortable sharing? Yeah, there's nothing really real underway to talk about with that, but it's something I've been considering is creating a directly democratic organization in Vancouver that interfaces with other organizations and parties and stuff. So like there's the Olympia Assembly in Olympia that some friends of mine help to run and participate in, where they have like quarterly Occupy style general meetings in public places, and then from that they break off into affinity groups and do sort of stuff. That's one thing I was thinking about as sort of interesting. I'm not sure if it would work in the Vancouver context versus Olympia is like a very progressive place, is a place that voted like 92% for Bernie in the primary in 2016. It's a college town. Obviously, you might have heard about the Evergreen College stuff that happened a couple of years back around the social justice debates. So I don't know if that would work here. The other thing, but I was sort of considering along those lines is like if you had a digital direct democracy platform that people could primarily organize on, and then use that as a way for progressives and radicals to interface with multiple different political parties and organizations at the same time. Like, so for example, in BC politics, we have both the Green Party and the NDP. I've typically organized with the NDP as like the more socialist party. The Green Party's got a very neoliberal side to it, but it's also got a very radical side to it. And the fact that the Green Party is neoliberal but adequately acknowledges the severity of the climate crisis, and the NDP has some issues acknowledging the severity of the climate crisis, but is much better on labor and social issues and stuff like that. So me as a person who doesn't like take a party flag and it doesn't like, if you get me in a political party, you haven't got me hook, line, and sinker. I've already been in multiple political parties in my life, and I reserve the right to leave at any time for any good reason. I wish I could be participating in both these parties to help move them to the right direction. I feel like we could create an organization that then sends delegates to both parties and represents what the shared group thinks. And then similarly with like in municipal politics, there's COPE here, which I've been involved with, campaign manager for and stuff. It'd be great to have an organization that can interact with things like that, or like move votes, move people to come out for votes that COPE has, or puts people on provincial council for the NDP or the Green Party and stuff, and where we have this like democratic organization that can interface and do like entryism in all these parties on behalf of a larger amount of people than are actually in each individual organization. That was sort of my dream for it. That was my daydream, what I would hope to do, what I'd like to do. I don't know if I've got the resources or energy to see something like that through. It's pretty intensive.
One question I do want to answer, what's your aim in promoting library socialism as a separate thing from communalism? And I think I want to tie this back to a couple things I've said already. Like one of the first questions we answered about how seriously we take it. And I was talking a bit about like how I don't necessarily see us as like political philosophers in the same vein. Like I don't think of library socialism as like a competing ideology with communalism or with other things. It's more of a way to talk about a lot of these ideas that can be useful for people. I mean, like I honestly don't even think of communalism as that different from anarchism or a whole bunch of like there's all these different flavors of this kind of thing, this like anti-authoritarian left organizing. And I like they have different details, but that stuff doesn't interest me as much because I generally tend to think like these different details. Well, like it interests me, but it doesn't interest me as like a conflict point, more as like a multiple options point. Or it's cool. There's these different ways to look at it, or different potential structures we could set up when trying to do something like this. And I think we need all of these different kinds of things. I think communalism is completely compatible with library socialism. Obviously, they're very similar, both very based on, or like in the social ecology sphere in various ways. I don't want to claim library socialism is social ecology because part of the benefit of us making this thing up ourselves is that we can make it whatever we feel like.
Yeah, I like that lack of
And then
accountability.
the other aim in promoting library socialism specifically, I think, is just like how it rolls off the tongue and how intuitive it is that what you're talking about, the connections between libraries and socialism, like common property used for the good of all, is really obvious to people, and they tend to get it or something like it right away. So it's a really great, as Sean was saying, public relations thing, like library socialism. I think it's a really good way to talk about these ideas.
Yeah, yeah. Along those lines, for some, yeah. It's. I mean, it's both a separate thing and it's not. In the ways that Aaron was sort of talking about is like I think of library socialism as hopefully sort of an attempt at a viable counter hegemony to neoliberalism. It's a set of common sense. It's a set of ways of talking that can challenge like the neoliberal consensus and the neoliberal common sense that's permeated deep in the psychology of people in around the world. Um, that so it's a strategy for talking about radicalism more so than its own real like distinct sort of well I mean it also I want it to be both. I want it to be whatever I want it to be whatever it feels right at the time because I love saying stuff like oh the true library socialist position is blah some random thing I think like that's fun and I never want to lose that and that's part of the reason that I would do that with library socialism rather than like communalism is because it gives you the freedom to be creative like that and like what do we like about I mean why did Bookchin talk about communalism rather than sticking with just communism or anarchism and stuff like that. One of the things that we like about him is that he copied the spirit of invention that was inherent in earlier writers. So this is sort of how ideas form and change over time and stuff like that. And we take it seriously sometimes. Sometimes we take it less seriously than like Bookchin did. He was definitely very serious. Like this is the way to do it. But what are the chances that Bookchin figured out the way to do it? I think pretty much zero. What are the chances that anyone figured out the way to do it? Pretty much zero. And like similarly with like Marx or any other person, the historical theorist that we might talk about or idolize, it's like why did Marx insist on making up his own ideas? Well, I don't know. It's just what humans do. It's what we do. It's what we love to. It's like I'm glad that Marx wasn't repeating what he had heard from someone else entirely. He was synthesizing ideas from a bunch of different sources, and that's what library socialism is. It's that same sort of process, the copying of the spirit of invention, taking good things from a variety of sources, trying to acknowledge our influences, obviously, but taking these things from different sources and then fusing it into something new. Am I saying that the Seriously Wrong podcast is of the same world historic importance of Karl Marx and Engels? Absolutely, yes. It is the same. Next question.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to choose between what's left if we're. Most of the things I had thoughts on. I guess the laziness one I have some thoughts on.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we just got a new question like right after it started too. That's here at the bottom from a Jamie. That's an interesting question, but we are over time.
Does Marxism fit into your idea of action? Yeah, just quickly on the laziness thing. We talk about it a bunch, I think, in the... I don't even know. We talk about it all the time. We probably talked about it in post-scarcity, but I know we talked about it in universal basic outcome, specifically the laziness thing. But yeah, there's a bunch of good arguments, but I don't know if my brain's
Bunch of good
on it
arguments
right now.
why laziness isn't a good argument against the common good.
Yeah, laziness isn't even really a thing. Like, everybody is lazy in that everybody wants to conserve as much energy as possible to get done what they feel motivated to do. And a lot of the issue with people who are lazy is that their motivation's been sapped by the life that they're in, or the way they were raised, or various things. Like, it's not... there's a bunch here. Other people didn't work as hard as them. That's like a negative solidarity thing. Like, I want other people to suffer as much as I did, or like the idea that suffering must necessarily be tied to getting rewards. There's a lot to untangle here. I don't know if I can do it all, but just in general, like, making people lazy by giving them things isn't true. It's just that when you give people things in a society that requires them to be like on this like constant treadmill of things, they're going to take a break. And then people are like, oh, you're taking a break? That's laziness. No, it's not laziness. It's taking a break.
Time to clean.
Yeah. It's bullshit. The idea that there are lazy people is not real. There's people with like motivation issues, which is a different thing. It's not like you have a character trait called laziness.
Good takedown of laziness. We need to wrap up now, and I can't answer all of this. There's all these great questions here that I want to answer. What I'm going to do is take all the questions that we didn't answer, and the next time we do an AMA, I'm going to put them in the voting queue so people have a chance to vote for them. There's a good chance that they'll be answered then. So sorry that we can't get through the whole list.
We did most of them, though.
I feel good about it, honestly. I don't feel too guilty. But thanks for joining us for this, and thanks for tuning in if you're watching the stream later. We've got some episodes underway right now that you can expect to see soon, that are going to be real good and interesting. And as always,
I'm so excited for you all to get to Papa and Boy 2 when we get there. It's I don't want to give anything away, and we haven't got a ton of feedback on the first Papa and Boy, but like I'm in love with this series, and I think you're all gonna love it as well.
Papa, right now, I feel like Papa and Boy is a treat for us, but as it goes forward, it will become a treat for more and more people. Actually, maybe that's a good. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on the big cliffhanger ending of Papa and Boy Part 1. Any thoughts on where it's going to go next?
Thoughts in general on Papa and Boy Part 1 is the beginning is really good, like the first 3 sketches, and the last 2 sketches before the ending weird stuff is also good, but they're a bit slower. In terms of story progression, at least, not much happens other than just like constantly asserting how much all this pressure rests on Boy's shoulders, and like the escalation of, oh, he's gonna do a surgery and he's enrolled in medical school as a child. But like that's my mild criticism of the first episode, but I love the first episode, and we've recorded part of the second one, and there's some wild shit. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we'll end the stream.
But yeah, pleasure sharing this time with you, everyone. We'll see you in the chat rooms, the Discord, etc.
Facebook groups.
And you'll be hearing from us soon in the form of more
Disembodied,
episodes.
highly edited voices.
Disembodied, highly edited voices.
Just like